Hello, my name is Darren Thomas and I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. In this video, we're going to be looking at behavior modification and students to help teachers with their classroom management. So let's go ahead and see what we can learn. Now, there are 5 steps here. You can call them steps or maybe there are 5 bullets, however you want to think about it. But essentially with behavior modification, we're trying to bring about a change in how the student acts or, behaves themselves, if you will, in whatever context that we're dealing with. So since these videos are primarily focused on the classroom, we're looking primarily, of course, at classroom management and monitoring and modifying students' behavior within the classroom. So again, there's 5 steps or there's 5 bullets you can use to try to help students with modifying their behavior from something that might be undesirable to desirable, or whatever the situation is that you're facing. So number 1, you need to establish a criteria. We will talk more about this in a few minutes. You need to, of course, do a performance check. How are they doing things right now? How are they doing? Also, you need to develop specific behavioral goals for individual students if that's necessary. The 4th bullet, you need to evaluate the results. And lastly, you need to praise students based on their actual performance. So let's take a look at each of these. So first, you have to establish a criteria, and that involves defining the desirable behavior that you want. And also perhaps, defining undesirable behaviors that you no longer want. And so the main thing here with this first bullet, or this first step, if you will, is communication. Being able to clearly delineate exactly what it is that you want and expect from the students. So if you look at our 3rd bullet here, we have an example. You might have a criteria for be respectful or being respectful. This is a common rule that you will find in many classrooms. But however, it's kind of vague and unclear what exactly you mean by being respectful or to be respectful. And so this is why we have the other steps or bullets to help to clarify things for the students. Now, after you have clearly defined what it is you want from the students or what you want the students to do, you have to do a performance check. That's where you kind of evaluate where the students are at in terms of the behavior right now. So what is their current performance if you look at the first bullet here? And so as you are looking at how things are going, you are able to identify problems, weaknesses, and how they are doing in terms of achieving this goal. In other words, when you're doing the performance check, you're showing the students where they're at right now. And in the prior step of establishing the criteria, you're showing the students where you want them to go so that they can see the difference. So if you look at the example here, you might have to give out examples of what it means to be disrespectful. And one common example of disrespect is, of course, yelling, at least for many people. So you can define that, hey, if you're yelling in class, that is disrespectful. If you're yelling at a student, that is disrespectful. If you yell at the teacher, of course, that is very disrespectful. And so as the students encounter these examples, now they have a picture of exactly what it is you want. Because in the first step, everything is theoretical, be respectful. That's probably not going to mean too much to anybody, even some adults. What does that mean, be respectful? We all define that differently. But as you start to identify specific examples of being respectful and being disrespectful, it creates a picture in the mind of what you mean by that. Let's move on. Now, this next step, it really depends. When we talk about specific behavioral goals, these are for individual students. Now, it all depends on what you're trying to modify here. If you're working with an entire class, it might not be practical to have specific behavioral goals for each individual student. However, if you're working with one troubling student, one student who is having behavioral issues, that is where you can identify specific behavioral goals for them. This is where you take what you did in step 1, establish the criteria, and you break it down into, I guess you can call them like micro behaviors, things that they should do or should not do in order to provide evidence that they are achieving the goal of being respectful, as an example. So again, we have an example here in our 3rd bullet. And so upon entering the classroom, the student will never yell at anyone. So obviously we're looking for a behavior that is not present, and that is of course yelling. And so this rule only applies for entering the classroom. So kids, being little lawyers, are going to find loopholes. So does this rule apply when we go to the library? Does this rule apply when we go to the cafeteria? They're always looking for exceptions, 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 which is why starting with general principles can be very difficult. Students need concrete examples. So you have to say, no, you cannot yell when you go to the library. No, you cannot yell when you go to the cafeteria. No, you cannot yell when you go to the classroom. In fact, you can never yell. You really have to break it down for them like that almost every single time, because they might know better, but they're playing the game because they want to see what can I get away with. So they're always going to look for exceptions where they can say, aha, in this situation, I can yell, which of course, there probably is no situation in which a teacher will accept yelling, except perhaps when the kids are playing. Now, the next step here is evaluation. That is when, after you communicated things, broken down the goals, given examples, now this is almost like a repeat of step number 2, except the students have a clearer picture of what is expected of them. So you're monitoring their performance and you're reminding them of what the acceptable behavior is in terms of how it was defined. And then of course, these last 2 steps, if you will, are kind of happening at the same time. And so you provide praise and feedback. When they do well, you say, hey, that was a great job. You give them feedback on maybe why they did a good job. Hey, I really appreciate how you came into the classroom quietly. Thank you very much. And also, you have to, of course, sometimes provide negative feedback, if you will. Hey, you came into the classroom too loud. You need to settle down. And so this constant feedback, which should not be delayed, it should be immediate. It allows the student to continue to learn what is okay and what is not okay. As they continue to push the boundaries, kids push the boundaries to know, okay, what is safe? All right, I can't do that, I can do this. They push those boundaries for a reason. It's not always rebellion, it's curiosity about what the limits are so that they know what is the context in which they can function and move about in the classroom. And so your job is to constantly provide this positive feedback and yes, even negative feedback so that they know what the limits are in terms of their behavior. So to conclude this video, you can see right here on this screen the 5 different steps or the 5 different bullets that you can use as a teacher to help to modify your students' behavior. Number 1, of course, so the first one is you got to establish a criteria, a general vague goal or principle that needs to be incorporated into the student's behavior. After that, the second bullet, you have to determine where they're at right now in terms of achieving the goal. Step number 3, if you will, you have to, and this is an optional asterisk one, if you will. If you're dealing with a large class, you can't make specific behavioral goals. But if you're working with individual difficult students, you can set specific individual goals in terms of what kind of behavior they can have. And then the last 2 bullets are all about evaluating, communicating how they're doing at that particular moment, and of course, providing praise and feedback based on how they actually were performing or conducting or handling their behavior. So I want to thank you so much for watching this video. My name is Darren Thomas. I am the Director of Educational Research Techniques. Take care.